Hello, everybody. I'm Amy Agigian. I'm the executive director of Our Bodies Ourselves, and I am so happy to welcome you here today to this webinar, our program being on activist authors on reproductive justice, a topic that could not be more timely or important right now. Of all the things you could be doing tonight, we are so glad that you're joining us and sharing space with us as we learn from the authors of these four different but very much related books. I want to give a land acknowledgement before we move on. Our Bodies Ourselves acknowledges that Boston is located on the traditional, unceded territory of Indigenous people who have been brilliant stewards of the land and water for hundreds of generations. Being located in Boston, specifically the Massachusetts and Wampanoag First Nations peoples, along with particular recognition for the Pawtucket, Neponset, and Nipmuc peoples who have traveled, lived, worked, and cared for their lands in and around Boston for tens of thousands of years. We extend respect and gratitude to all First Nations people who continue to live and steward in the cultural, spiritual, and educational customs of their ancestors. We also acknowledge the overwhelming violence, physical, cultural, environmental, spiritual, and I would add reproductive, that has been inflicted by colonialism for over 400 years, and which continues to this day to profoundly affect the lives of Indigenous peoples. We express our deep respect and appreciation for Massachusetts women, men, children, and elders, both leaders and ordinary people. We also know that a land acknowledgement is not enough, and we commit our bodies ourselves to honoring and lifting up Indigenous voices and perspectives in all of our work. So I want to mention that Laura Prieto and Grace Cook will be moderating the discussion, and Kaylee Wilson will introduce our activist authors next. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kaylee Wilson. I am a recent graduate of Tufts University, and I had the privilege this semester of working at Our Bodies Ourselves as an intern. I would love to introduce our authors today. So we'll start with Candace Bond-Theriault is a mother, lawyer, professor, author, speaker, and social justice advocate working at the intersections of law, policy, reproductive justice, racial justice, LGBTQIA+ liberation, and economic justice. Currently, she is a senior director of policy at the Black Women's Health Imperative, as well as an adjunct professor of sociology and criminology at Howard University. Candace previously held positions at Demos, Columbia Law School Center for Gender and Sexuality Law, Planned Parenthood Federation of America, the National LGBTQ Task Force, and the American Civil Liberties Union. She was a member of the board of directors for Spark Reproductive Justice Now and Reproactive Action Advisory Council, and she's written for the publications including The Nation, The Advocate, and Miss Magazine. Stanford University Press published her Accruing Reproductive Justice and Invitation in 2024. Candace co-chairs the Our Bodies Ourselves expert panel on abortion and contraception with Marlene Freed and Pamela Merritt. Carrie N. Baker is a scholar, lawyer, journalist, award-winning author, activist committed to elevating women's and reproductive rights issues. Currently the Sylvia DeLugash Bauman Chair of American Studies and chair for the program of study of women, gender, and sexuality at Smith College. She founded the 5 College Certificate in Reproductive Health, Rights, and Justice. Carrie Baker is also Miss Magazine contributing editor and co-chair of Miss Committee of Scholars. She's published 5 books since 2007, including The Women's Movement Against Sexual Harassment, Fighting the U.S. Sex Trade, Gender, Race, and Politics, Sexual Harassment, History, Cases, and Practice, Public Feminism from Academy to Community, and most recently, Abortion Pills, U.S. History and Politics. She's written for Our Body Ourselves for many years, including the website's very popular essay on the history of abortion laws in the US. Loretta J. Ross is a celebrated activist with a long history of fighting against white supremacy, as well as for human rights, women's rights, and reproductive justice. Loretta Ross is the co-founder of Sister Song, the organization that defined reproductive justice and strengthened Black voices in the fight for reproductive liberties. She's also been part of the Our Bodies Ourselves network throughout her life. Loretta has been featured in the New York Times, Huffington Post, CBS News, and gave an incredible speech for the TEDx organization. She was recently inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame, and she continues to pave the way for those involved in the reproductive justice movement. Her money books include Calling In, How to Start Making Change with Those You Would Rather Cancel, Reproductive Justice, An Introduction, Undivided Rights, Women of Color Organized for Reproductive Justice, and a new book coming out this fall, Abortion and Reproductive Justice and Essential Resistance, co-authored with Marlene Freed. And finally, Marlene Freed is a longtime reproductive rights activist, scholar, and contributor to several editions of Our Bodies Ourselves. She was the founding president of the National Network for Abortion Funds and Abortion Rights Fund of Western Massachusetts. Marlene Freed has continued to commit her life's work to activism for abortion access and reproductive justice. Currently, she is a professor emerita at Hampshire College, board member and senior faculty advisor to Collective Power for Reproductive Justice, and on the board of Women Help Women. She's edited many publications on reproductive justice, including From Abortion to Reproductive Freedom, Transforming a Movement. She co-authored the book Undivided Rights, Women of Color Organized for Reproductive Justice, and Abortion and Reproductive Justice, An Essential Guide to Resistance with Loretta J. Ross, which will be released this fall. She co-chairs the Our Bodies Ourselves expert panel on abortion and contraception with Pamela Merritt and Candace Bond-Theriault.
Thank you so much, Kaylee, for the introductions. Hello, everyone. I am Laura Prieto. I am the program director for Our Bodies Ourselves. And it is my great pleasure to be here in this room with you. We appreciate, as Amy said, you spending your time with us and with this fantastic panel. We'd like to start by spotlighting each of the books that these 4 recent books, one actually upcoming, that these authors are here to talk about today. And we decided to go in order of publication. So starting with Carrie Baker, each author will talk about their book for just a few minutes, and then we will turn to some discussion together. As we'll remind you in the chat, please put your questions in the Q&A, and we will have a good section of the time together to answer your questions as well. Carrie.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. It's great to be here tonight. So I'm here to talk about this recent book, which came out in December. It's published open access with Amherst College Press, which means you can just go to the website of Amherst College Press. You can read it online. You can download it to your computer or your device. You can even listen to it. There's a recording. You can also buy it, but it's there. And I did that because I didn't want my book behind a paywall. I wanted it out there so people could read it, anybody, not just people in an academic setting, but activists, people who use abortion pills, policymakers. It grew out of my reporting for Ms. Magazine. I started covering abortion pills in 2018 and did it pretty intensely. And then shortly after Dobbs, anti-abortion doctors and randomly a dentist filed a lawsuit in Amarillo, Texas, arguing that abortion pills were dangerous and that FDA approval of abortion pills had been rushed through in the 1990s through the approval process without adequate evidence showing their safety. I knew that the pills were safe and that that was false. I wasn't as sure about the history. So I went into the scholarship and tried to find the history of abortion pills, and there wasn't one. So I decided to write it. And I had already been interviewing activists, people who had used pills, policymakers, researchers, providers of healthcare. And so I went further and I interviewed over 80 people for the book. I did archival research, I did legal research. And so it really is the story, the sort of intense battle to get pills on the market and then to try to make them more accessible. Because the anti-abortion movement tried to block them from coming to the United States. They were first called RU 486. You old timers will remember that. And then finally it got approved in 2000, but the FDA was so scared by the anti-abortion movement that they put all kinds of belts and suspenders around the pills. So they were very hard to get. And when in countries around Europe, about 70, 80% of abortions were done with pills, here in the United States, it was like 20%. Because it was so tightly restricted. And it was during the pandemic that the medications began to really loosen up. Shortly before the pandemic and during the pandemic, with the advent of telehealth and telehealth abortion. And then ironically with the Dobbs decision, which really clamped down on access. So people had to be creative and find new ways. So the book charts the creative, determined, and courageous people who found new avenues, new ways for people to access these pills. And despite Dobbs, abortion has gone up about 20% since when Trump first got elected in 2017, when there were about 830,000 abortions, to today, or last year, there were 1,038,000 abortions. So abortion has gone up over 20% in the last 8 years, largely due to abortion pills. There's other factors too, but despite Dobbs, more people are accessing abortion today than in over a decade. And so this book explains how that happened. Of course, it's an ongoing story, and so I continue to report on this for Ms. Magazine, but this is a great place to start to understand what's going on today with abortion pills. Thank you.
Hi, I'm going to go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Candace Bond-Theriault. I use she and her pronouns, and this is my book with all of the tabs because I teach it in my class. And this is Queer and Reproductive Justice, an invitation. And just a little bit of why I wrote this book. It took me 6 years to write this book. I'll start there. And I have been doing queer and reproductive justice work for a long time. And it wasn't written down. There was no history about it. There was no writing and recording about it. For me, it's really important to record movement work. Otherwise, it gets lost and we move on. So for me, it was really important to write down work that was really being done at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. So queer and reproductive justice is not a concept that I created. I created a framework in order to explain it in an academic setting and a way for folks to expound upon it, but it's an invitation to join a space of activists and advocates who are doing this work in real time today and have long been doing this work. And so the book is a movement building book, first and foremost. And in order to represent that, it's not just me talking, it's not just me giving my thesis and my theories and my point of view. It's a book that includes a lot of different voices and diverse organizations, individuals who I do really intensive movement perspectives with. So I have folks from the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health. I have folks from CICUS. I am not an expert on gender affirming care. So I did a very intensive interview with Whitman Walker Health because they are the experts on gender affirming care. And so for me, it was important to lift up voices of folks who have been doing this work for a long time. And I also ask a lot of questions because I don't have the answers to all of these questions. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done. But for me, this was the beginning. This is an introduction. This is an invitation to a really rich and robust set of work with some really, really amazing people that are doing this work, and it really runs the gamut. I wasn't able to cover every topic that I wanted to cover, but it does a really good job, in my opinion, of kind of surveying the land and doing a landscape analysis of what kind of work is happening. So I will stop there, but I look forward to hearing from everyone else tonight.
Yes. Well, my name's Loretta Ross. As you've heard, I'm an associate professor at Smith College. And one of the two books I'm going to be talking about tonight is one that was just published in February called Calling In: How to Start Making Change with Those You'd Rather Cancel. And I wrote this book because I was extremely frustrated with the call out cancel culture. I felt that it was weakening the movement for human rights, that it was, in fact, pushing away the very people we needed to build power, to stop this march towards fascism that's happening globally, but particularly in the United States. And so I wanted to analyze the patterns of call out and help people learn what they could do to transition from a calling out culture into a calling in culture. And so I invented a continuum, which is about calling people out, canceling them, calling them in, calling on them to do better, and calling it off. And then I teach techniques, both online, because I have an online class looking at this as well, and you can find it easily through my name. But this is what I do. It's about building the power of the human rights movement and stop turning our worst attacks on each other, but to do a proper threat assessment and make sure we're focused on the enemies of freedom, justice, human rights, and democracy. So I'll stop there and turn it over to my co-author.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Thanks, everyone, and especially to Laura Grace, Amy, and Kaylee for making this happen. And it's just a thrill to be here with my activist colleagues on the screen. Co-conspirator activist authors. I think we would all put activists before author in trying to explain who we are and what we do in the world. And I would like to say that even though the book is not here physically yet, today it went to the presses, and you can order it at 30% off from the University of California Press. And you can also, of course, buy it on places like Amazon. The book is part of a series, Reproductive Justice, A New Vision for the 21st Century, which is from the University of California. Why this book? This is a question that I took so seriously at the beginning of the project. Why another book about abortion? And in order to even begin to do the project, I had to, in some ways, justify it to myself. And if you ever go to a bookstore and just look under the A's, you'll see why it was a question for me. So for us, I think, me and Loretta, writing about abortion in a reproductive justice frame is documenting the work that we and so many people have been doing for a very long time. And in that way, it's a kind of a logical progression from undivided rights. And I think one of the things that we learned from doing undivided rights, like you, Candace, and like you, Carrie, were the untold stories that people need to know, and feeling an obligation to document it in some way. And what we were very struck by in Undivided Rights is when we would do book events, people actually felt like being in a book meant that what you were doing was real, which was, kind of like mind-blowing to us, but in fact true. So we thought about introducing reproductive justice to new generations, even though we are constantly in it. Most people don't really know what it is. It's a framework, it's a concept, it's a movement. But I think for people outside, even people inside our movement, don't really have a grasp of it. And of course, for so many years, the work on abortion was done in the framework of choice. And I feel like that's constantly something that we are resisting or trying to help people understand that if you put a justice lens on abortion, you come out in a very different place. It tells a different story. Bringing a justice lens to abortion tells a different story and also puts different stories in the foreground. And in many ways, this is not a book about abortion. Because abortion rights itself, the battle is not really actually just about abortion. And so for people to understand that and to be equipped to resist the anti-abortion forces is to really be able to connect all the things that the battle is about and bring those to bear. It's grounded in Black feminist theory, and it centers the right to have children and families, which really is about whose childbearing is permissible and whose is not. So both sides of the reproductive coin inextricably linked. Abortion and Reproductive Justice tells a radical history of abortion politics led by women of color who always understood this. And in that way, the most vulnerable people are put in the center of it. Race and white supremacy are at the center of it. Resistance to oppression is at the center. So intersectionality is not really just an abstract concept. It defines and describes the lived experience of the most vulnerable people. Reproductive justice focused advocacy is essential for a liberatory future. It enables us to break the isolation of people and movements and of the US, bring the US into global perspective. The US movement for reproduction for so long has been kind of distinct, kept itself apart, didn't learn. But of course, reproductive justice, abortion pills came to us from the global South. Everything was not invented here. Reproductive justice, who is the book for? That was my other question. Who's the book? It's meant to be an introduction, but it is not simplistic. So it introduces the core concepts needed to understand and meet this movement. So like Candace, it was important to bring people who are actually doing the work, to lift them up, people who are working in the trenches. It's a book for, so actually, it's a book for everyone in that way, in the sense that it is actually inclusive, that it's important that no communities be left out of the abortion story and the abortion history. And it's for everyone in the sense that it's the only way to win. Perpetuating disconnection of people and movements is actually a losing proposition. And going forward, we just can't keep doing that. And it's for everyone in the sense of being necessary for resistance. Meeting the tsunami of attacks that we're all facing in all these different areas requires all of our courage, optimism, and imagination. So I see each of our books as a call to action. So we're a fierce Indigenous activist, Cora Whitehead Artichoker, who has now passed, a part of the Rosebud Sioux tribe, called all of us to action. She asked us, what are you willing to do? What are you willing? What am I willing to do in this movement? And she asked us to ask that of ourselves. And we're going to all have to answer it, and given what's going on. So that in a nutshell is abortion and reproductive justice. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Again, we're welcoming questions from the audience throughout. They could be about individual books or for our individual activist authors, not as much author activists as activist authors. To start us off, I have a few questions, and I'd like to start with the moment that we're in right now, and ask to what extent each of your books are responses to the Dobbs decision, whether the Dobbs decision changed your thinking and your action as well as the context of your book. I mean, Marlene, you just touched on this idea of how the framework of choice has become a framework of justice, at least for the four of you and the work that you do. I don't know if that's related to the Dobbs moment or the Dobbs decision, but you know, anything you would like to say about the relationship between your work and your book in particular to our post-Dobbs climate now?
Well, I could start, if that's okay. So Absolutely. Dobbs, but as I mentioned earlier, what really inspired it was a lawsuit filed shortly after Dobbs trying to restrict abortion pills or remove them from the market entirely. But the need for really, even though Dobbs happened in 2022, access had been drastically dwindling beginning in 1992 with the Casey decision. In 1992, the number of abortions peaked at 1.6 million and then progressively dropped year after year because of trap laws and restrictions and everything that was, the hyper medicalization of abortion. And by, as I mentioned, January of 2017, the first year of Trump's first administration, it had plummeted to 830,000. It basically been cut in half. And even before that, when Texas tried to and succeeded in shutting down half the clinics in the state, after Wendy Davis with her tennis shoes and catheter tried to block that legislation, many of you may remember that, the movement became very aware that we were going to lose Roe and that we already had lost access. And so the movement to try to increase access to pills and put pills in people's hands, to move it outside of the medical system, to give people access no matter where they live, affordably and easily. That really got turbocharged around 2013 to 14, the year after Dobbs. I mean, after that Texas, Wendy Davis thing. And so while Dobbs, I think, really turbocharged this movement, it had been building for over a decade because everybody deep in the movement knew very clearly that access was gone long before it was technically gone with Dobbs and abortion bans. And it was a good thing that activists started so early, because by the time Dobbs happened, folks were ready. Folks hit the ground running. They'd already been running. They had already developed telehealth during the pandemic. They had already begun the process of developing these community networks that are now sharing pills for free in banned and restricted states all across the United States. Strategies, as Marlene mentioned earlier, from the global South, right? And those ties, I document those close ties in the book and the ways in which there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of sharing ideas and strategies and even the networks themselves. I mean, Los Libres came up into the United States and helped create a Los Libres US and served tens of thousands of people in the time after Texas banned in September of 21, which was over about a year before Dobbs. And then, of course, with Dobbs. And so I think while Dobbs was significant, what I found as I delved into this movement is that folks had been working, that access had been lost long before Dobbs, and folks had been working in determined, creative, and courageous ways to create alternative channels for people to get abortion pills, even in the face of further and further restrictions.
I think I would argue that the Hyde Amendment of 1976 was our Dobbs for low-income women, women in the military, women on in Native American reservations and things like that. And so with the Hyde and its affirmation by the Supreme Court in 1977, vulnerable women always felt that we couldn't depend on the Supreme Court for the protection of our human rights. And so Dobbs just became more of the same rather than something totally unexpected, given the way that the Supreme Court had been intentionally packed by people who were manipulating the abortion debate for their own political purposes. And by the way, that's one of the points that Marlene and I tried to write, that while it seems like it's only about abortion, the manipulation of women's fertility always is part of a bigger scheme around reinforcing the dominance of white supremacy and depressing the fertility of those of people who are unwanted. And so Dobbs, for many women of color, was basically saying, okay, now everybody's going to be treated as badly as we're being treated historically. And I just want to point that out. And one other thing, Carrie, Webster, which happened in 1989, which even before Casey in 1992, was what animated Black women to write the We Remember brochure and to put out a call for Black women and Black women's organizations to organize in defense of abortion rights. So again, everybody has their own when and where I enter story. But the point is that manipulation of women's fertility is a project of every empire from ancient times to now. And of course, there's no reason for women or people capable of getting pregnant to even put up with that. And that's what our stories of resistance are attempting to document.
Oh, go ahead, Marlene.
No, you go.
I completely agree with that. And I appreciate you bringing up the Hyde Amendment. That was incredibly important, particularly for Black women in the South. And for me, the Dobbs decision for LGBTQ folks, it was, again, more of the same. I don't think that it was a surprise to the queer movement, to the queer reproductive justice movement. For a long time, people were saying Roe is the floor, Roe's the floor. It's not, it's not where we want to be anyway. But for a lot of queer people, particularly queer people of color, like we didn't even have a floor. Like we weren't even considered at all. We weren't even in the same geography as the reproductive choice movement. And we were fighting to get into those walls, into the house. And so for the queer movement, the queer liberation space, Dobbs was just more of the same. But what was, I think, most important, one of the things that was very important about the Dobbs decision is not the actual decision itself, but Clarence Thomas's concurrence opinion, where he named the other cases that we should reconsider, which all spoke about, which looked to Griswold and contraceptive access, and of course to Lawrence v. Texas and Obergefell v. Hodges. And those are the two landmark Supreme Court decisions that have to do with enabling same-sex marriage and just same-sex consensual sex. And so I'm a big Netflix person, so I just binge watched The Residence, Shonda Rhimes' new show, with Uzo Adobe, and it's so good. It's so good. But to me, the Dobbs decision, Clarence Thomas's concurrence was like the blink. And if you've seen the show, you know what I mean. It's like the blink. That's the tell. That's what we were waiting. Like we knew that's how they were thinking. We knew that's what they were planning. But now it's in writing. Now it's there. And so people can't say any longer to the queer community, your rights are not tied with reproductive rights. It's in black and white. It's from the Supreme Court. Like we have been telling you this for decades. And he blinked. He said it. And so for me, that concurrence is just another leveling down of activism and shows how much work we really need to be doing together as a larger movement in order to include queer folks, trans folks, gender nonconforming folks in this work, because all of our rights, of course, are tied up together. But that writing for me, he blinked, and that was it. That was the tell that to go to funders, to go to other people in movement spaces, to be like, this is where the work is.
Yeah, thank you for that. I also love that show. I would say that in some ways, Dobbs was the wake-up call to cisgendered white middle and upper middle class people. That in that sense, that's what Loretta is saying about Hobbes Hyde came earlier, and people of color and all vulnerable people weren't getting their needs met, and now it's for everybody. So, but I would say the arc of our book is actually longer, and we thought started this project during the first Trump administration, and we were concerned that an overwhelming number of white women voted for Trump, and it kind of freaked us out. And we felt that people actually did not understand what their reproductive rights were about. So we, in all humility, decided to write this book so that we would be part of the process of preventing a second Trump administration. Now, I'm not saying we can't take credit for the fact that it didn't happen in 2020, but I also don't want to get blamed for his win in 2024. But this question made me think. I'm about to be 80. All of my arcs are very long. They go back a very long way, and I hope they'll go for a very long way into the future. But for us, writing this book was really about helping people understand the kind of connections that vulnerable people have understood for a really long time.
When we were planning this event, I asked each of you what questions you wanted to ask each other. And I felt like I got variations on a theme from all of you. So I think you really want to talk about this, and our audience wants to hear it too, which is questions about, like, what do we do now? What do we do with this information? What do we do with these frameworks? What strategies, lessons, and practical advice are most useful now as we all strive to counter the rollbacks of our reproductive health and rights and reproductive justice, to confront fascism and white supremacy? You know, what would you distill from your own thinking and writing about this?
So I would say we have to think outside the box. It's a new world at so many levels, as far as, law, like there's nothing normal in the world that Trump is creating. And we have historically, I think, in so many ways been so reactive and been so focused on being rule abiding. I mean, I really was shocked in my research on my book how many people in the abortion rights movement and reproductive rights movement were like, well, is that allowed? Can we do that? Oh, is that wise? Oh, wait, but somebody might not like that. Like the niceness kind of drove me crazy. I was, and if anybody sort of did anything like not by the rules, like we called each other out. And I think there's like the other side throws spaghetti at the wall and sees what sticks. We like wait until we're invited to put a strand of spaghetti on the wall. And even then we do it hesitantly. I mean, I'm like mixing lots of metaphors here, but the point being, we have got to start thinking outside the box and allowing each other to think outside the box and not policing each other so much. I think that we need to not just be defensive, we need to be offensive. We need to not just be thinking, oh, how can we protect what little we have left? We need to just blow the whole thing out of the water and think in new and creative ways. And that's what I saw happening in the abortion pill movement. Like provider shield laws. I mean, Kaylee, you did your research project on that. I mean, this was like thinking outside the box, thinking, oh, well, why can't a New York provider mail pills to somebody in Texas? And there was so much pushback, especially from mainstream reproductive rights organizations in New York State when folks were pushing for this legislation. They're like, oh, that's dangerous for doctors. Oh, that's dangerous for that. Oh, somebody might come after. And it's like, we're beyond that. We've got to just start, and I realize it takes privilege to be able to do that, but it really, I mean, it's not like this hasn't been happening for years. I mean, like sharing abortion pills has been happening in immigrant communities for decades. I mean, I traced it back to like shortly after, you know, women in Brazil figured out that misoprostol alone. I mean, it was like the early 90s here in the United States, and immigrant communities were sharing miso. So it's like, this is what people who are excluded from the medical system have been doing for years. And the thing is it's completely safe, but we're also worried. And so, I mean, obviously, you know, using the pills are safe. What happens if you end up at a hospital and you get criminalized? I mean, so I'm not saying this is easy, but I just, my point being that we need to think creatively. We need to be courageous. We need to think outside the box and not go by the playbooks that we've had forever, to come up with new plays, to come up with new ways of thinking about things. And you know, and like Loretta's always talking about human rights. I mean, you know, these are our human rights that they are taking away. And we need to harp on that. We need to repeat that. We need to have moral indignation about what they're doing, rather than just being good girls and trying to like travel halfway across the country to get the care we need, you know, to comply with the laws or whatever. I mean, they're going to criminalize us no matter what. So we need to take care of each other. We need to work outside the system. I don't know. That's what I learned from researching this book, is that we need to be willing to push the boundaries.
In some ways, I feel one of the things I learned was the old "our bodies, ourselves" wisdom, feminist wisdom, which is the importance of taking what you need and putting the tools in the hands of the people who need them and use them. And that's what the abortion pill movement is about. It's what the AIDS Action people did when they were not being allowed to bring drugs into the country. So, so I think what you're saying, Carrie, about courage, imagination, and persistence is sort of incredibly important for the resistance. But of course, we're not all equally situated. I mean, just like the barriers don't fall the same on everybody, the criminalization doesn't fall the same. So it's partly a matter of figuring out who can and who can't, and protecting each other, and doing this in a collective way, in a community based. I mean, if you think about the abortion pill movement, it's very community based. That's what networks are.
Absolutely.
So it's and I think about the abortion funds in the same way. It's exactly, and they started, even some of them, before Roe, because it was very clear that the law was not going to make abortion accessible to everyone. It's just been clear from the beginning, and the Hyde Amendment just like, yeah, put it in everyone's face. And so community-based solutions, basically people saying, okay, the government's not going to do it, we'll do it. And it's not really a great substitute. You know, it should be funded by the government, because you can't exactly raise enough, but you can do a lot. So yeah, for me, that message of uh, taking what you need, making sure that, and teaching it to everybody, and so that other people know. Many people still don't know about the abortion pills. They don't know what they are. They're scared of them. A lot of the work that the anti-abortion movement does is to fuel the fear. You know, is abortion really dangerous? You know, are vaccines really dangerous? So I think that we have a lot to counter in the work that we need to do, and continuing, which is partly why I think it's so very important that OBOS continues to be a source, not just of information, evidence-based, but information from a feminist perspective. It's not WebMD. It's our feminist WebMD.
This moment reminds me of when Carol Downer started the feminist women's health movement, where we had to learn how to use speculums and examine our own cervixes and stuff. And the thing that we know as Black women is that the systems were never designed to include us. maybe to experiment on us, but not to serve us. And so we're going to have to return back to those kitchen tables, sharing information with each other, looking out for each other in the community, because there may be no fixing this broke system to deliver the health care that we deserve and need. As a matter of fact, it's getting worse. On purpose, it's getting worse. It's not an accident that the social welfare contract has been broken. Cruelty is the point. And so this is where we are. I didn't panic when Dobbs fell because I was not surprised. I was disappointed, but not surprised. And I think that would describe anyone for whom the Supreme Court consistently disappoints us in upholding our human rights.
I completely agree. And I think the opposite bookend that I'm going to go to from Carrie of, yes, I think that we need to dream big and create really innovative solutions. But I also think there's a lot of rich history of really innovative actions that happened or were planned that didn't happen. Like there's a lot there that I think that we really should be learning from, and especially at this time, this day and age where books are being banned and public libraries are being defunded and the Smithsonian is getting whitewashed, like whatever is happening in all of our history. It's going to be even more important that we know what it said, that we know what happened, that we read actual books. I tell my students, like, I need to see like hard covered source book material in that you cite in your papers, because we can't just rely on what we can Google, what we can see only on the internet, which is why one of the reasons I'm really proud of being a part of Our Bodies Ourselves, because we're giving evidence-based, scientific, data-driven, factual information that is not just opinion. And so this misinformation, whether something is fact or opinion, has become so blurred that that is a huge fight in and of itself. So for me, going back to the hard copy, going back to Black feminist and Black womanist writings and essays from the 60s, the 70s. I mean, I have on my right here, because I cite to them all the time and I'm always reading, like Killing the Black Body, Sister Outsider. Like these are the books that matter. Like these are them. And we need to continue to read them and teach them and grapple with them and find ideas and gems for activism in them. Like we have such a rich history. So it's not that we have to just create something out of nothing. We have so much to build upon. And so for me, it's really about teaching that education and teaching new generations. As Marlene said, people may not know what reproductive justice is. My students walk into the class and they're like, I think I know, like abortion, choice, like I'm not sure. And I'm like, all right, by the end of the class, they're like, this has everything to do with me. I had no idea that the choices that my single mom was making for me was in this context. Like I wasn't understanding. And then they leave the course with a very different view of what reproductive justice is and how to engage in it. And so for me, sometimes it's just starting with those readings, like starting with like the feminist book clubs, like the kitchen table conversations, the pamphlets. Like I feel like we're gonna have to get back to some of that hard copy, the bulletin board, you know, put on the bulletin board that we're meeting in this classroom at 7 p.m. to talk about reproductive justice. Like we need to do that. And so some of the things that we need to do have been done, but we've moved away from them because everything's been digitalized and everything's been moved online. And we have to bring that back. We have to bring that back to in person a little bit.
Yeah, so
I
I'd
don't know
love
if
to
you
talk.
can see this. I dug deep. I don't know if you even recognize this, Loretta. This is
Yes,
something.
I do.
This was our first co-conspirator moment.
Wow.
And we wrote this in 1992. It's Reproductive Freedom, Our Right to Decide. And it was part of a pamphlet series from that was Open Magazine did. So sort of a little bit on the model of what you're doing, not exactly. It was before everything was digitized moment. But I think what you're saying is so important, Candace, in terms of knowing our own history and claiming it. You know, claim we do stand on the shoulders of so many people. And I just want to lift up, we have another colleague at Smith, Joyce Fillet, who has done this 500 years of reproductive justice timeline. So if you think you're tired, and I think it's going to be coming to collective power for reproductive justice, and there are ways in which, and Loretta, Carrie, and I are working on it along with other people, but there are ways in which the people are working on making this accessible. And one of the things that I really appreciate about it is it's bringing to light the stories that we don't know, the activists that we don't know about, who aren't written about all the time, or get a megaphone. So look out for the Roots of Reproductive Justice project.
Could we talk some more about, yeah, your own reading lists, your own inspirations? You've already touched on some suggestions, Audre Lorde, Carol Downer. What else? Like, where do you go to find energy and hope and inspiration yourselves? What keeps you writing in the face of everything that we're going through right now, and what keeps you doing the activist work in the face of the backlash that we're experiencing now?
Well, I'll jump in here, and it's Ms. Magazine. Ms. Magazine has been publishing for over 50 years, and I think all four of us have published it with Ms. It still comes out in print copy 4 times a year, but it's also online with a lot more breaking content. It is a major place where feminists share their strategies, they share their thinking, they spread the word about campaigns that are happening. I think it's a really important source and a way to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of women's movement activism, and just hearing what others, and many people who write for Ms. Magazine are scholars. We have the Ms. Committee of Scholars, which recruits and trains feminist academics across the country to write for the magazine, as well as activists. So it's like a sounding board where people can share their ideas and learn and build movements. So I think this is an absolutely critical source. And it's also now available through EBSCO as a database in college and university libraries, and is used by women's studies faculty to educate people about the long history of the movement. I mean, going back to 1972, so many people, like some of the people that we've mentioned, have been published in Ms., published really groundbreaking work in Ms. And so all of those you can have access to through this new database. And so I think this is one source that I, absolutely rely on.
I can jump in and say I get inspiration every day from my kiddos. So I have 2 young children. So for me, motherhood, parenthood is such an art form, a creative art form. And so part of that is I'm trying to teach the next generation of how to live, how to interact with the world, what the world should be, how they should dream about the world, but then how is it really the realities, the pragmatism, and trying to kind of meld this line of wanting them to dream really big, as expansive as possible, and also let them know what's really out there. And so for me, I get a lot of inspiration from them and the next generation. In my books of, Black feminist scholars, I also have kid books, because it just reminds me, it grounds me of the kiddos, my kids, and this is Dream Big Little One. Like, this is for me. Like, this one's mine. Like, I want to dream big too. Like, it grounds me that we, when we're kids, we think so much is possible. And sometimes it's finding that somewhat ignorant, but also just really blissful energy of what the world could be and how to envision the world. So for me, that's what I like to draw inspiration from. And also I draw a lot of inspiration from my students because we just have really real, raw, deep conversations about issues that we're all grappling with, particularly this semester. January through May was very intense for my students. I'm sure for all of you who are teaching, and we just broke it down. They're just like, what is happening? What does this mean? What is birthright citizenship? Where does it come from? And so we like go through the Constitution, and I'm like, okay, well, let's go back to the 14th Amendment, and let's like take it back a little bit to talk about what happened before the 14th Amendment, and really breaking it down for them helps ground me in the moment that we're in, and seeing and making me hopeful that we will have a continual movement, right? That we're not just stuck, because I'm sure every generation has felt really stuck in the moment that they were in. And every generation, particularly for Black folks, particularly for Black women, particularly for Black queer women, have been in really hard situations for the last 400 years. And so I know that my ancestors felt stuck, right? And so what I want for myself and I want for my kids is to feel just a little less stuck and feel that there is somewhere to go. Like there is room, there is abundance out there. And it's really for us to create those futures for ourselves and our kids.
I'm looking at the, oops, sorry. Oh, am I unmuted? Yeah. I'm looking at the chat, and so I'm inspired by the presence of several long haulers. And I don't mean long haulers COVID, I mean people who have been in the fight for the long haul, as we all need to be. But I also take a lot of inspiration, not just from teaching, but also from activism. And there's so many young activists who are taking up the fight and are energized. They're not defeated by what's going on. They're like, what the hell? We're doing it. So I feel like that's for me the only thing that gives me hope and inspiration is that there are new generations who feel as strongly as I do, as strongly as anyone ever has, and who are blueprinting it in their own ways. And it some of it looks different, some of it doesn't. So I'm not. It sounds really weird. I'm not depressed by everything that's going on. Partly because when you burn it all down, you also have a chance to build it up better. I don't mean to sound like the Build Back Better thing, but to actually have laws that might work for more people, to have abortion access that might be there for everyone. So I'm a little optimistic. I know that seems really weird, but I have my rose-colored glasses on.
Can I just jump in and just respond to your not Build Back Better framing, and just say that I think this moment is also really important because it's showing that it's not a zero-sum game, right? It's not a build or burn down. And when I was a baby advocate, when I was starting, I was just like, burn it down, burn it down. And then I was like, okay, so it's burnt down, now what? And so I pose these questions to my students every semester. Okay, what are you building? Like, what are you gonna do? Like, if say at midnight tonight, it's done. It's done. Capitalism is done. Like it's done. So what does tomorrow look like? What is it? How do you envision it? And it's really a struggle for folks to kind of like name and create and figure out what that is. And especially in this moment where we've been in DC, that's what's happening. They have burnt it down. Like they have dismantled the government in a way that many of us, myself included, was not expecting. And so now that it's burnt down, what's happening, right? Now there's just a vacuum. And so for me, it's an interesting teaching moment to be like, burning it down is not always the answer. Sometimes I will say that, sure, it is the answer. If it's just like trash, burn it down. But like, it's more about transforming. It's more about creating solutions to specific problems, right? It's not just about just throwing it all together into a garbage fire and lighting it on fire, because then what are you going to do with the ash? Like, then the environment is in trouble. Like, you just burnt the whole city down. So there's real tangible consequences to some of the activist thinking that I had when I was younger. And for me, writing this book kind of matured my thinking, because I was looking at all of these scholars and all of these activists and advocates who came before me and who stand beside me, who actually were thinking about transformation. And so I think that is a huge key that we have to think about moving forward. And there's so much more opportunity in transformation than there is in just burning it down and building something better, right? Like, it's transforming the systems and communities and relationships that we have to move them forward. And so the Build Back Better made me think of that.
I think I find my inspiration by looking at and reading about the stories of people who've been through even worse. Like, I have read and reread Viktor Frankl's The Man's Search for Meaning for a long time, because he talked about the necessity of hope, and how hope sustained him in the death camps of the Holocaust. And so I don't know if that's too dystopian for people. And certainly I do read the stories of uplift as well. But I always want to admire the human spirit and understand that no matter how atrocious things can become, that we don't give up, we don't give in. And particularly when I think of my own family's lineage, because I'm in my 70s, my mother, who was born in 1922, cleaned white folks' houses on her hands and knees while raising 8 kids. And so whenever I think I'm about to be tired of sitting on my ass and pontificating on something, all I have to do is remind myself of the generation that came right before me. We're not talking about what my grandmother had to do. We're talking about how my brothers and sisters picked cotton for their summer jobs down in Texas. And so whenever I think I'm giving in to despair, all I have to do is remember what my family's been through and appreciate the fact that everybody has to put up with oppression, but a few of us are privileged enough to fight it and never lose sight of that privilege. Even though it can be hard conducting the fight, everybody else just has to put up with it without analyzing it, without writing about it, without organizing against it. And so, in many ways, I see doing this work as a privilege.
Thank you. Thank you all. That's a really beautiful sentiment, Loretta. We have a
Just say one thing about the hope thing, because I'm thinking about Miriam Keba, who's an abolitionist organizer, and what was important to me about what she said about hope. She said hope is a discipline. We have to practice it every single day. It's not an emotion. It's not optimism. It's not like blind optimism. It is something that you have to keep at. And of course, we all know that. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have hope. In just the way that she's talking about. And what I also appreciated is she said it doesn't preclude feeling other bad things, sadness, frustration, anger. So it's like hope has to sit with all those other things and still keep the flame going. I got stuck on this burning thing, Candace, but I think look, one of the things is we didn't choose to burn this down. It's not burning down in any way that we would have taken things apart, with leaving so few on-ramps for putting things back together. We would have done it very differently, but we have to do it however we do it.
Mhm.
Thank you. We have just under a half hour left. We wanted to provide lots of time for audience questions. So while we're still waiting for some questions to roll in, we have a robust audience, so please don't be shy and put your questions in the Q&A. I'm waiting to be fed some by Grace and Kaylee. In the meantime, what do you wish someone would ask you about? What do you wish I had asked you about with regard to your work in reproductive justice, especially so far?
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about rather intently is, how does the reproductive justice framework need to be updated for dealing with 21st century problems like genomic and assisted reproductive technologies? And so in March of this year, Professor Jaleisha Jolly from Amherst and I from Smith organized a think tank called Reproductive Justice Futurisms, because I believe that the abuse of reproductive technologies will, in fact, upgrade our present social inequalities. Instead of solving the problems, it will create new problems. Like, there are people who are already talking about growing bodies just for harvesting their organs, and we know who's vulnerable to that kind of thing. There are people who preach a doctrine of transhumanism that talk about the gene rich or the gene enhanced people over the natural people like ourselves, who are not designed in a test tube. And one of their advocates said something that I thought was totally alarming when they said, when it comes to the gene rich and the naturals, the gene rich are going to have as much interest in having sex with the natural that present human beings with gorillas. When they are saying that kind of speculation, they're very Trumpist. They say what they're going to do, and it sounds so incredible. We don't take them seriously, and yet they do mean it. And so, what will reproductive justice look like? We have that middle tenet, the right to have a child, but does that imply the right to exploit vulnerable people to satisfy your right to have a child with exploitative surrogacy relationships and those kinds of things? So, interrogating how scientific racism will continue in the 21st century, and how vulnerable people will continue to be either neglected or exploited in the 21st century, is something that's beyond the abortion debate for me. And I think we're distracted from actually looking seriously at what's beyond abortion because we're so caught up in still fighting the 19th century battle.
I completely agree. I think for me, the next big field that I'd like to really dig deep into is around the use of artificial intelligence and technology in public health. As Loretta was saying, we are here. It's here. Artificial intelligence is here. And it's going to transform how we do everything in our world. if you're not, you know, using Chat GPT in a couple years, you're going to be left behind. And so what does that mean for our education, our healthcare, and it's already being employed in healthcare settings in ways that we likely do not know. AI is being used to transcribe medical records, to make pre-diagnoses. And we need to be aware of how that's going to affect not just reproductive healthcare, but just healthcare in general. And how can the reproductive justice analysis include pieces of work like the AI technology digital divide that's already here, and it's going to become even more of a disparity as years and years go on. So I think that to me, I'm like looking at you, Loretta. Like, so when are we going to do it? When are we going to add another tenant? What's this? When are we going to get together? When's the brain trust? Because I do think that there are 21st century problems that need to be specifically named and addressed. And if we don't do it soon, we're going to miss the moment.
Can I do a small commercial and say that within a week or so, we're going to issue a call for papers on reproductive justice futurisms. And so if you get the call or you get the CFP, please share it widely. And I'm looking at you, Candace, because I want you to consider contributing to the RJF anthology on the topic.
We do have some questions from our audience, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. If we don't get to yours, we will share that with the panelists and possibly get back to you afterwards. But one is a question about the actions that you would suggest the everyday person can take today, you know, to protect our healthcare access. You know, what could we do today? And follow up, what longer term actions do you suggest that we take, whether that's individually or like groups and movements that are out there that we should see?
So one thing that I would encourage people to do is to share information about plancpills.org, which is an amazing website that has information about how to access abortion no matter where you live. It has information, on the homepage, it has a drop-down menu. You select your state or territory, and it will tell you the nearest brick and mortar clinics, which may entail traveling, obviously, if you're in a banned state. It will also tell you which telehealth providers serve your state. And if you're in a banned state, you know, there are 6 clinics that serve people in banned states. So it will give you details about that. It also has the community network that serve your state. So remember, I mentioned earlier, every ban or restrictive state has community networks sharing abortion pills for free. So it has where you can get that. And it also lists vetted websites, e-commerce sites that sell pills for as little as $65. So spread that word, let folks know that exists. There are also support services for people self-managing their abortions, like the Miscarriage and Abortion Hotline, the Repro Legal Health Helpline, and the legal If When How's legal support line. So there are a lot of resources out there, but we're facing an uphill battle because there's a lot of online censorship. And so the best way is through word of mouth, through community networks. There is a whole network of doulas across the country supporting people self-managing abortions. So we need to spread this word, especially in states with bans and restrictions, and especially in rural areas of states where it's legal, where people still may not know about how to access it. That's something everybody can do. You can share this information on your social media accounts. You can share it through your, you know, social groups, through your employee, you know, your friends at work. And again, just sharing this information is so important. So I really encourage everybody to do that.
You know, what I would add is also to keep an eye out. One of the things that we do in our book is tie the coercion forcible reproduction, like coerced sterilization, to abortion. So to keep an eye on what's happening in the coercion arena. And some people have it already noted that sterilization goes up as abortion becomes less accessible. So, and again, as with somebody asked something about the media quite a while ago in the chat, and we need to be the purveyors of information and knowledge because so many people are just getting what they get from Fox. So we really need to spread the word about activism, about resistance. We don't even know how many things are going on that would uplift all of us. And then in particular, to be ready to blow whistles when we're seeing something. It really is true. If you see something, say something, but we have to say it really loudly.
Now, I just want to say mainstream media is a real disaster right now.
Disaster.
I mean, here's an example. I did this critique of a front page above the headline, above the fold story by the New York Times trashing Planned Parenthood as Congress was preparing the budget to defund Planned Parenthood, which will mean 200 clinics will close, many people will lose access to care, and New York Times is spending its resources on maligning Planned Parenthood. It's not a perfect organization, but it's a massive organization. You can always find problems in a massive organization. Meanwhile, they're not saying anything about crisis pregnancy centers, which they're 2,700, and they're posed to replace Planned Parenthood, to take that Title X funding and that Medicaid funding that is disappearing to real reproductive health clinics and sending it to so that people won't have access to care at all. And that's what New York Times is spending its resources doing. So I'm very frustrated by mainstream media. Either they don't get it or they misrepresent it. And that's why I think that resources like Ms. Magazine and other alternative media resources are so important right now to provide a feminist perspective, because mainstream media does not have a feminist perspective. It's missing so much.
So let's be clear. Their whole profit model is based upon hatred, lies. I mean, they love a Trump because it keeps them in business, even if it doesn't protect the democracy that they claim to care about. And so, of course, they're going to give all of their attention to those things that they think will help their bottom line.
I completely agree. And if there's a silver lining, maybe it's not silver, maybe it's a gray lining, is that young people aren't watching the mainstream media at all. But the other equally daunting task is, how do you confront misinformation on social media and misinformation on TikTok and misinformation on podcasts? Just because you have a podcast doesn't mean that you're an expert, does not mean that you know anything, that you have a degree, that you have any lived experience. You're just saying words. You're just on YouTube. You just uploaded that video from your kitchen. That doesn't make you an expert. And so I think making that clear is a lot of work that we need to do in the movement, in the larger social justice movement, about really navigating fact versus opinion. It's this misinformation. It's so rampant that even I am like, wait, is that real? Like, can I trust that photo? Like, that doesn't look real. I see something that, like, even me, and I'm like, even my work, I'll be like, I didn't say that. Did I say that? It's just, nothing is trustworthy right now, which makes it even harder to get real information to people, because you might give them the facts and they're like, I don't know this source, right? So part of it is doing that, what Loretta said, those kitchen table conversations, those book clubs, those crochet knitting circles, right? And like knowing and trusting the source. And so building community and relationship, I think, is going to have to be a key way to get true information out to people, because people are so skeptical of what they read online, either that or they just believe everything, right? There is kind of like no middle. And I'm in the skeptical corner, where I'm like, I don't know about that. But I also think it's about doing your research, right? So that's something that you can do right now is like go do a social media cleanse. Go do a cleanse. Like, where are you getting your information? Can you actually audit your own intake of information? Like, where do you spend the most time? What websites do you go to? Who are those authors? Who are writing those pieces? Do you know anything about them? Because sometimes I even get into a mindset where I'm like, oh, I trust this source, the New York Times, but not anymore, right? Like now it's individual writers that I'm following because they've said very true evidence-based research and put those out into the world over years. And it's like, so we have to do that extra layer of work of auditing our own selves. And so that's something everyone on this call can go do tonight is go back and look at their history and just say, where do I spend my time? Who are the people I go to watch? Who are the people I talk to? Am I thinking that I'm getting information from this show on CNN? Wait, maybe that's just opinion, right? So, and doing some of that critical thinking for ourselves.
Marlene?
We're missing you, Marlene.
There we go. There we
Marlene?
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to the question about disability and reproductive justice.
Yeah.
And it was very hard in the choice movement to disability. Choice was a hurdle for people living with disabilities because the choice movement made a lot of the ability to have a normal child and not and blah 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 and to sort of demonize disability or capitalize on negative images and stereotypes. Reproductive justice, I think, has a really good bridge to disability justice. And it opens it up in a way that had not been opened up before. So, and it's actually a fair amount written about the connections between disability justice and reproductive justice, people who are crossing that bridge all the time. So I can't remember who said that, somebody back here, but if you write to me separately, I will give you some sources.
Yeah, that's a question in the that I'm seeing in the Q&A that Marlene's referring to. Could you speak about disabled women and reproductive justice? How much are disabled women addressed in your work in activism, and how are disabled women engaged in these issues? How is the outreach happening? If anyone else would like to speak to that.
Well, two scholar activists that I recommend is Mia Mingus, who's also an amazing transformative justice activist, and Rosemary Garland Thompson, is it Rosemary Garland Thompson, who is retired from Emory University, but one of the leading scholar activists on disability justice issues. And Rosemary, however I keep messing up her name, came to our Reproductive Justice Futurisms Conference to talk about the rights of the disabled through looking through the RJ lens projected into the future.
Another question I want to pick up on from the audience asks whether we should be organizing separately and stealthily or collaboratively together. What your thoughts are on strategies of now I've lost it, unfortunately. Yeah, are we more powerful as separate clandestine units, or should we would we be stronger if we had a common organizational unity in our efforts?
Well, I don't know if that's a real question. I mean, the women's movement is not everybody joining now, the National Organization for Women. It's about many different people who fight patriarchy in their own ways, but can come together strategically at important points in time. And so I'm not sure if would we want everybody in the same organization. I don't think so. I think it's more important for our strategies not to get in each other's way rather than us belonging to the same organization. And particularly when those organizations use that charismatic leader model, that can be problematic as well. So I'm not quite sure. And then the whole question of stealth organizing. I mean, unless you're running an underground, resistance movement for armed struggle, I'm not quite sure why you would want to believe in a stealth organizing campaign. And let me say, under fascism, it ain't gonna protect you anyway. So why would you not be able to be clear with your base when your reason for being stealthy in the first place ain't gonna work?
So I will say with abortion pills, they are independent networks in each state. They have to be very careful
Oh
because
yeah.
they are extra legal organizations. That said, they are networked through a couple networks like redstateaccess.org. If you go to their website, they will have a list of all the emails that you email in each state to contact that community network. But they have to be very careful about how they are connected and that they're secure. And so that's an example, I think, of where you have to there is nationwide coordination, but there's also a lot of independence at the local level because they're dealing with a situation where they could be criminalized.
But at this point, everything's going to be criminalized. See, I'm not saying that that's not a good thing that they're operating this way, but that's under the old paradigm where we had somewhat belief in the Department of Justice that wasn't serving as the administration's personal law enforcement. Right now, everything will be criminalized that the president doesn't like. And under those circumstances, we can't just assume that the rules that we grew up with are the ones that are going to be implemented now. I don't want to sound too alarmist, but it is unprecedented, at least in the 20th and 21st century, what we're dealing with now. And so we should probably take our lessons from the people of Chile and other places that have survived dictatorships, rather than thinking anything from our liberal historical perspective is going to be the answer for right now.
I wanted to raise one other campaign that I think is really important right now, which is the effort to combat crisis pregnancy centers. There are grassroots groups across the nation working to address the disinformation, the theft of public funds with no accountability or transparency, and the danger that these centers pose to people who go to them thinking they're real reproductive health clinics. And we are working on creating a nationwide network to share resources. This is based out of Chicago. It's Reproductive Transparency Now. If you want to try to plug into that, or you have a local campaign, but you want to try to get ideas from people working in other states, there is so much creative, amazing activism going on to try to raise people's awareness about these fake clinics and to hold them legally accountable. They are taking people's medical information, claiming that it will be HIPAA protected, and then sharing it with national anti-abortion organizations. There is evidence that they're sharing people's information with the police to criminalize them for people that are accessing abortion. There's also, information where, like here in Massachusetts, there was just a class action lawsuit against a CPC that told a woman a ectopic pregnancy was in utero. She ended up in the emergency room. Her fallopian tube burst. She almost died. She brought a class action lawsuit against this crisis pregnancy center, Clearway Clinic in Worcester, and got a settlement. This was really groundbreaking. I just wrote a piece about this for Ms. I'll drop it in the chat. But there is a lot of really amazing work going on, but we are trying to connect across state so that we can support each other. And so I'll drop that story in the box.
Thank you, Carrie. You always remind me that there's something you can do immediately right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think we're at time, sadly. It's really flown by. Thank you to our wonderful panelists, Loretta, Marlene, Candace, and Carrie. Thank you so much to our audience for joining us, for the really animated discussion going on in the chat and lots of resources being shared. So we'll capture all those. And this message of informing ourselves and then helping to spread that information to others is really core to the mission of what Our Bodies Ourselves is still doing over 50 years later. We hope that you will all keep reading and discussing and working for reproductive justice with us. If you appreciated tonight's event, we hope you'll also consider donating to Our Bodies Ourselves, maybe what you would have paid for a ticket, to help support these programs and to help us bring more programs like this to you. So thank you, a Zoom round of applause for our panelists, and we hope to see you again soon. Our next event is on June 12th. We're going to do a film screening and panel discussion of documentary film Fannie Lou Hamer's America. So hope to see you soon. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank
Thank
you
you so
Bye-bye.
much, Laura.